Alright, today's lesson we're going to be discussing functions and more specifically how to create a rule from an equation for a function. Okay, so another title that we could have used to discuss this is called, we could refer to these as literal equations and solving literal equations. So for number one, where it says write a formula for f of a in terms of a, that basically all that's telling us to do is solve for a. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and solve this one for a. First thing I want to do is I want to split it into two sides. Okay, and since we're solving for a, in mathematics we really like to move the variable that we're solving for. We want to get that on the left side and get everything else on the right side. So since I'm solving for a, I want to move that 4a to the left. I'm going to combine it with the negative 6a. But in order to move the 4a, I have to subtract it because it was positive. So now, since both of these are negative, they're the same signs, I add them. That becomes negative 10a plus 3b equals 1b. Even though the 1 is not in front of the b, you can go ahead and put that there. Next, I want to move all my b's to the right-hand side. Everything else that I'm not solving for, I want to move it to the right. So in order to move that 3b, it's positive, I have to subtract it. So minus 3b and minus 3b. Now the 3b's are going to cancel out, and I'm going to end up with negative 10a equals negative 2b. Okay, positive 1b, negative 3b, the signs are different, so you subtract, keep the sign of the larger one, it's going to be negative 2b. And now the last step here, because I'm solving for a, I just want to divide everything by negative 10 and make sure I simplify my answer. So my negative 10s cancel out. A equals, well, negative divided by a negative is a positive, and we would get 2b over 10. However, we can reduce that. Both of these can be divided by 2. So a is really equal to 1/5 b. That's one way of writing it. Or you may see somebody write it as a equals 1b divided by 5. Or you could write it as a equals b divided by 5. All those represent the same thing. Okay, let's take a look at number 2. Number 2 is our direct. We don't have to guess or figure out what they're asking us to solve for. It tells us solve the following equation for n. So once again, I want to go ahead and split my equation into two parts, the left side and the right side. And since I'm solving for n, that's the variable that I want on the left side of the equation. Well, I already have my n term. Here's my n term here. It's already on the left. So I don't even have to move him. I just want to move everybody else to the right-hand side. Well, that means I'm going to have to move this positive 5m. Well, how do I move a positive 5m? I have to subtract 5m. And since the 11 does not have an m, we can't match the 5m and the 11 together. So on the left, the 5m's cancel out. I'm left with negative 3n equals. Now when I rewrite this, I'm going to put my variable term first. So I'm going to write it as negative 5m. And since that 11 is positive, I'm going to say plus 11. Now, the last step that I want to do is just divide everything by negative 3. Because I want to get the n by itself. So I divide everything by negative 3. Alright? So, the negative 3's cancel out. And then you're left with n equals. Now, I'm going to write this two different ways. I'm going to write it as a fraction, the sum of some fractions, and then I'm going to write it as an entire fraction. So a negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 3 can't go into 5, so this would just be 5/3 m minus, because a positive divided by a negative is a negative, I would just write minus 11/3. Now that's one way to write the answer. The other way that we could write this answer, we could say that n equals negative 5m plus 11 divided by negative 3. you could write the answer that way as well. Okay? Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at number 3. Number 3 says write a formula for h of m in terms of m. Basically, solve for m. So, in doing so, I'm going to go ahead and divide my equation into two parts, a left side and a right side. And we want to solve for m. Now, in order to solve for m, it looks like we have the distributive property here, but really I want to take a different route. This right here is, this negative 6 is being multiplied times the group m plus 2. We could, technically speaking, start off by dividing everything by negative 6, because we can get rid of that negative 6 that way. So I can divide both sides by negative 6. What would end up happening here is that the negative 6 would cancel out, and on the left this would leave me with n plus 1 divided by negative 6 equals m plus 2. Now, I know that I said that usually traditionally we like to have the variable that we're solving for on the left hand side, but in this case, the most efficient way, we still want to solve equations in the most efficient way. The most efficient way would just go ahead and start isolating the m, getting the variable, trying to get it by itself, and then we can rewrite it as with the m on the left hand side. Excuse me. Now, the last step here would be just to subtract 2. That's the only way. That's the last thing here to get the m by itself. And however, let me move that down because I want to show. We're subtracting 2 from both sides, so I'm going to have to put that out here to the side on the left side. So the 2's cancel out, and we're going to be left with m equals. Now, when we rewrite this, you're gonna see these things move places. So n plus 1 divided by negative 6 minus 2. That's how you could write that. Now, that's one way you may see it written. Another way is just to write it with the m on the left. So m equals n plus 1 divided by negative 6 minus 2. That would be our final answer right there. Okay? And number 4. Number 4, there's no guessing involved because it just directly tells us, hey, solve for y. So let's go ahead and just jump in and solve for y. Divide our equation into two parts, a left side and a right side. And now we want to go ahead and start and get the y term by itself. Like I said before, traditionally speaking, we like to get the variable that we're solving for on the left, but in this case, we also, when we're solving equations, we also like to be as efficient as possible, meaning the least amount of steps to get to the answer. So in this case, the very first thing we could do to the most efficient move we could make is just by adding 12 to both sides. The 12 is negative, so we want to move it by adding it. By doing that, I'm going to get the y term by itself. So on the left side, I'll have 6x plus 14 equals 7y. Now I only have one more step. Remember, when we're solving equations, we want to be as efficient as possible. We can always rewrite it, the final answer, where we have the term on the left-hand side and everything else on the right. But for right now, the last step here would be to divide everything by positive 7. And when we do that, the 7's cancel out, and we're left with y equals, well, 7 can't go into 6, so this would be 6/7 x plus 14 divided by 7 is 2. So you could either write it like this, or you could write it as y equals 6/7 x plus 2. Final answer. And that will conclude today's lesson about literal equations, or writing a rule from an equation.